When people talk about why Rockstar is one of the best video game studios out there, usually they are referring to the breathtaking open worlds, the impressive AI that makes everything feel real, or action and craziness unlike anything else we can find out there. But for me, the real most underrated thing about Rockstar is actually their utterly captivating character writing. And there's no better example of this than Arthur Morgan, one of the greatest characters in not just games, but all of fiction. You see, Arthur at the start of Red Dead Redemption 2 is a criminal to the bone. He is mean, ruthless, and more than anything is a man forged from struggle and adversity. As a young child, he lost his family and was taken into a gang under the leadership of his new father figure, Dutch. And under Dutch's wing, Arthur blossomed into a fearsome outlaw that helps the gang pillage, steal, and kill their way into what they see as freedom. And more than most characters that try to be badass, Arthur from the very beginning of the story really does feel imposing. You can see the fear in NPC's eyes when Arthur turns on them, and even walking around town with your gun holstered creates an unmistakable sense of presence, where it becomes obvious that simply by you being there, the town's entire dynamic has changed. This isn't a man who tries to act tough, but really just has big muscles and says cringy things like a lot of other games. No, here, Arthur feels like an actual badass, the type of guy you would run into in real life and think to yourself, let's not mess with him. But the key reason as to why Arthur may just be one of the greatest and most compelling characters of all time is how much deeper his persona goes than just that. Because the start of Red Dead Redemption 2 is characterized by Arthur being his usual self, doing bad things and committing heinous crimes like murder, all in what he sees as a noble goal to support the people around him. But that unwavering support for those people is also the first indicator that this journey Arthur is going on has a lot more to it. Early on, for example, when some of the girls in your gang try and seduce some local men to get information pertaining to the main story, one of the men starts to get aggressive and physical. And without even a second of hesitation, Arthur steps in to protect the woman and beats the man to unconsciousness. It's clear that while Arthur is certainly not a good man, he has a sense of almost admirable duty and respect for those he considers close to him, the type of man willing to die in the blink of an eye for anyone he considers family, like the gang. However, as the story begins to progress more and more, Arthur starts to struggle with the things he and the gang are doing. Dutch slowly is losing control over reality, and seeing the pain he is causing so many innocent people starts to slowly form a seed in Arthur's mind, wondering if what he's doing is even right. For so long, Arthur lived by a strict code that he saw as the beacon of belonging. But as he starts to form into more and more of his own man, questions about his actions can no longer be pushed away. And maybe the single best example of this is one event in the story that is the crucial point at which Arthur begins to turn: the Downs family incident. You see, the Downs family owed a large debt to an individual that Arthur was working for as a debt collector. And when Arthur arrives at this family's house, he is greeted by the father Thomas as he begs and pleads to Arthur, exclaiming that he can't afford to give him any money because his family is already destitute and barely surviving. But Arthur is a ruthless outlaw and immediately begins screaming and prodding the man, eventually resulting in Arthur beating him completely senseless in front of his own family and children. And at that moment, the mother, Edith, screams and begs for Arthur to stop the pointless and maddening violence, barely convincing him to finish after explaining that Thomas is very sick with tuberculosis and has no money left. But just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, a short time after this encounter, Arthur receives news that Thomas has died, and that the debt he was given has now been transferred to the widowed Edith, who turns to prostitution in order to keep her starving son alive through endless struggle. And it's in this moment, along with so many others, that really start to make Arthur reflect on the man he truly is. In fact, in his journal and game, you can read harrowing entries about how Arthur struggles with what he's done, and even more, through his actions afterwards, things begin to change. Slowly but surely, Arthur starts to question more and more why he is doing what he's doing. And as the gang seems to get even more crazy and violent under the leadership of Dutch, Arthur at the same time begins his path to redemption. Suddenly, he is paying families back out of a sense of dread for what he's done to them, refusing to even let them thank him because of the immense guilt he feels in the shadow of his past. And this heroic redemption art of sorts comes to a tumultuous head when it's revealed later later in the game that out on a recent mission, Arthur himself has contracted tuberculosis and has little time left to live. And in the face of his own death and utter annihilation, Arthur dedicates himself to becoming a better man, slowly pulling away from the gang, which eventually results in him being killed by a traitor amongst their midst and turning against all the values that Dutch originally taught him. It's the perfect story of redemption for a man that many could argue didn't deserve any, a ruthless and sadistic killer that was a mercenary and muscle for hire, treating people's lives and families like they were nothing, all for his own personal gain. And also, it's in many ways analogous to the Wild West itself, the setting of the game, a rough and rugged world that is on the brink of a revolution, of becoming less violent and more civilized, mirroring the exact journey Arthur goes on as well. However, the single most powerful moment, the one that solidifies Arthur as one of the greatest characters ever put in the game's medium to date, happens towards the end of the adventure, well down Arthur's path to redemption and well into his spat with tuberculosis. Talking to a nun on a bench, Arthur starts as his usual charismatic self, but now at the tail end of his life, facing the demons of what he has done, as well as the demons he will soon meet following his death, he opens up to the nun with a simple and sudden,
"You're too smart for me, sister. I guess I'm afraid."
The man you watch this entire game be nothing but a force of utter masculine violence and leadership. A man that would kill and hurt for his own gain, and a man that through any obstacles stays strong, finally has a moment of utter weakness, scared for his own life and for the people around him he's hurt. Seeing such a strong and formidable force like Arthur, such a violent and mean individual, claw their way out of the depths of hell and into the light of sorts is such an unbelievably powerful moment, and it shows exactly why Arthur as a character is about as good as it gets, full of so much deep emotion, both good and bad, but also an irresistible sense of duty and honor to the ones he loves, while also sacrificing all of the codes and parables he abides by to in the end become a better man, even on the edge of destruction at the hands of a horrific and vicious disease. Maybe more than any other character out there too, Arthur shows a realistic depiction of truly strong leadership, someone that sacrifices everything they know in the service of others, all while battling their own thoughts in a constant struggle to become the person others really need. And there's countless moments in his story too where you will cry, laugh, or cheer, and it's a testament to the immaculate writing how such a ruthless character can become so beloved by the end, all while going on a real hero's journey, the type that isn't sugar-coated by Hollywood and Disney nowadays. A man defined by immense strength, but also an even deeper sense of love and duty, one of the greatest character stories ever told. The Mass Effect franchise is practically defined by its unforgettable and legendary characters. Greats like Garrus, Tali, Mordin, Rex, and Commander Shepard himself are all immensely deep and interesting people to dive into and get to know, all with their own sets of political beliefs, ideas, and wants and goals. But for me, I've actually always liked one thing about Mass Effect more than any of the characters, and that's the world building. It's the whole reason I like the first game in the series so much more than, say, the second installment, my least favorite in the trilogy, and while that's an unpopular opinion to have, I'll defend it to the grave. And under this context, there's actually one specific character in the series that rises above everyone else. One that most people might not think of immediately, but one that for me quite literally defines what it is that made me fall in love with this series in the first place. A villain that played host to the greatest moment in the entire multi-game spanning story, and a presence so omnipotent, so powerful, and so unknown that few things in fiction can even match it. For those of you that don't know, Sovereign is one of the main two bad guys in the original Mass Effect game, and in many ways is the catalyst for all of the events that happen afterwards. But the Mass Effect series didn't gain true mass market reach and appeal until the second game, so tons of people never actually even met Sovereign in this first installment, and only know some of what makes makes him great from mentions in games afterwards. The thing that makes Sovereign so compelling as a character, though, is that unlike most villains, he truly feels unbeatable, and that's due to such patience and setup from the narrative. You see, you learn early on in Mass Effect 1 that the galaxy is at a threat from an all-powerful and ancient race of machine intelligences known as the Reapers. In fact, even at the start of the game, you see Sovereign taking off from a planet you are on, assuming it's an enormous enemy ship, when actually it's the enemy itself. And as you piece together more and more of the narrative while playing through the game, you start to get hints at what you're up against, with visions of past races that have been killed by the Reapers in cycles millions of years before yours. And it's all of that buildup and mystique behind Sovereign and the Reapers before even meeting them that makes them so foreboding and formidable, along with really interesting. I'll never forget the first time I ever played Mass Effect being absolutely consumed by the Reapers and the idea of their doom and Armageddon. And despite how great the characters around me were, what I really wanted to know more about was the driving force of the main narrative, the big bad guys. And this desire to know more is finally answered near the end of the game during the mission on Vermeer, where you first come into contact with the Reaper ship you saw at the start of the game, and the enemy that's been behind the scenes pulling the strings the entire way through finally reveals himself. And it's here you're met with quite literally the greatest single moment for a villain in game's history, in my opinion, where this ancient and all-knowing being of sorts speaks to you over hologram, filling the room you're in with a menacing red hue. And no matter what question you ask, no matter how much you prod, Sovereign always feels one step ahead of you and treats you not as his equal, but as nothing more than an ant being crushed by a shoe. Seriously, listen to some of this conversation here and tell me it's not awesome.
Your lives are measured in years and decades. You wither and die. We are eternal, the pinnacle of evolution and existence. Before us, you are nothing. Your extinction is inevitable. We are the end of everything.
And I can't express just how amazing and unexpected this reveal the first time playing Mass Effect is. So much so that it will send the stakes of the story to an entirely new level, and in my case, even gave me goosebumps as a kid. Going up against a character that is not only cunning and strong, but beyond our human comprehension. A Cthulhian-like entity that has goals and ambitions that reach beyond the pale that we can even understand. And following this moment, you then soon have to fly back to the Citadel, a massive space station at the center of all galactic commerce and life, and save it from literally one ship. One being, Sovereign, from destroying literally the entire galaxy on his own by activating a secret function in the station. It's such a powerful moment and reveal for a character that up to that point basically didn't play a role. And it's the exact things like this that makes me love Mass Effect so much, and the first game especially. Literally one Reaper, one character on his own almost wipes out the entire galaxy you know and love. And even after killing him, discovering that there are thousands more Reapers just like him flying towards you from deep space makes it so terrifying and the perfect ending. Really though, for me, what made Sovereign such an utterly captivating and compelling villain and character was that he truly embodied the perfect idea of an unbeatable foe. A presence and intelligence so above our own that even trying to understand it would require millions of years of evolution. And while the Reaper's motives and history is further fleshed out later in the series, especially in Mass Effect 3's DLCs, this character here in the first game really exemplifies what made the series so great in the first place before the Reapers just became another enemy that we fight like in every other game. A universe out there to discover, but also one that we can't ever fully understand, making us ask more questions than we'll ever get answers to. And sometimes that's what the best characters out there do. They make you appreciate the universe and world building even more, resulting in you falling in love with everything else a game has to offer too. And for me, no villain did that better than specifically Sovereign, a literal god machine that embodies the fear of the unknown itself. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that is absolutely filled to the brim with compelling and thought-provoking characters. Whether it be on side quests, main story missions, or small gigs, it's almost impossible to explore this world for any longer than an hour without stumbling upon some of the best and well-written NPCs of all time. So choosing just one for a video like this can be really difficult. And while originally I was deciding between Johnny Silverhand, who has such an amazing arc as a person and is someone who is constantly with us throughout the entire game, or Panam, Rogue, and Takamura for their steadfast outlooks on life that really make you think, the real most compelling character from this entire game is, in my opinion, Judy Alvarez. Because you see, Judy is a tragic character in every way imaginable. She has suffered her entire life through loss of friends and family, and in some ways has even been swept up into the downtrodden life of gangs and underground BD film surfing. And so when you first meet her, she's quite standoffish, reserved, and quick to have you leave. She doesn't trust anyone around her, that is, except for the only person she has left in her entire life, Evelyn Parker. However, as you progress through the trials of the main quest of the game, you eventually are taken down a path that includes Evelyn being kidnapped from the dollhouse she works in and being forcibly tortured in a secret underground dungeon. And so Judy reaches out to you looking for help as she knew you worked with Evelyn, and after hours of fighting and searching, when you finally stumble upon her in that forsaken room underground, completely devoid of thoughts and emotion, with blood streaming down her face and a camera ominously facing a torn apart bed in a sketchy room, it hits you how bad Judy must feel. She cries and screams out to Evelyn only to look into her now soulless and devoured eyes that say more than any words ever could. So you help Judy bring Evelyn back to her apartment, where she thanks you for all that you've done and says that she'll help Evelyn get back on her feet while wishing you the best. But as if it couldn't get any worse, you soon receive a call from Judy, struggling to compose the very words she speaks, begging for you to rush over. And it's here you discover Evelyn dead in the bathtub, after taking her own life, with Judy beside her crying uncontrollably and struggling to stand amidst the weakness her own soul has suffered. A girl who has had nothing but pain throughout her life and lost everything she held dear, now lost all that she had left. And looking into her eyes and seeing that pain tells so much more of a story than almost any character out there could even attempt to. About someone who feels they let down the last person who loved them in a world that has forsaken them. The real triumph, though, comes from what happens later, as Judy composes herself, stays strong, lighting a cigarette on the balcony and looking for revenge. And whether or not you decide to turn Judy against that path or help her on it, you eventually will fully earn her trust and be asked to come to see her childhood home, which is now buried underwater. And it's here she talks about how she grew up as a child, the pain she's been through, and most importantly, how despite it all, she still carries on with hope. No matter what life throws at this woman, no matter what this damn city decides to make her suffer through next, there is a fire in her soul that lights one within V and yours alike as the player as well. Because you see, Judy doesn't come across as bombastic as Johnny, as ride or die as Panam, or as strong in conviction as Takamura. But what Judy does have is something that in a way is so much more impressive. An absolute resilience in the face of adversity to stand strong and remain hopeful no matter what, not just in her future, but in helping others around her that she cares about. And it's why seeing her at the end of the game take those steps to leave Night City and find a new home for herself is so powerful. It's a reflection of a character we don't often see in games, movies, or any form of entertainment for that matter. Usually the best characters are masculine and strong men or women, or feminine men that finally found their soft side and can open up. But it's seldom we see such strong female characters that also never had to shed their sense of femininity to get there. It's why I found Judy so much more interesting and gravitated towards her more than Panam on my first playthrough. She is a broken girl, someone who has been administered to the worst in life at every turn. And yet despite all of that, she refuses to give up, but even more compelling, refuses to stop believing and trusting in others too. She's a character that shows through the hardship. Becoming more hard yourself isn't always the answer. Sometimes through your love and willingness to rely on others and believe in them, you can keep that lovable essence inside too and still be strong. The type of character that defines what it means to be strong in the first place. And also one of the most compelling of all time. A woman that no matter the circumstance stands as a beacon of hope in a world that has none, showing just how deep and emotional a journey with another human can get through all the highs and lows that you experience with her. One of the most fascinating and reflective video game characters out there.